Do you believe that your life matters? Not just in the general sense, of course, everybody's life matters, but I mean in the sense that if you don't do what God has created you to do and uniquely gifted you to do, that there will be a real loss to God's work on this earth. I mean, so many Christians think their life just doesn't really matter. Their obedience doesn't really matter. Maybe you're young and thinking, I've got my whole life to serve God. I'm just trying to find my own way. I could sort of put off really seeking first God's kingdom for right now and make up for that later on. Maybe you're middle-aged and you just feel overwhelmed. Look, we've got a family. We're just trying to get things going on. We really don't have time to seek first God's kingdom. We'll do that later when we're maybe empty nesters. But then the empty nesters say, well, we spent our whole life doing this and that. It's time for us to sit back and just enjoy ourselves. We can collect seashells and grow our own garden instead of God's. And you think, well, in the end, I'm going to be saved and it really doesn't matter that much. But what if it does? What you're doing today really matters. What if your life matters more than you could ever dream? And what if the church needs you every bit as much as you need the church? That both of those are so true. They've done studies of suicide notes, and what they found is that they rarely mention romantic heartbreak, which you might think, or even financial problems, or even health problems. Far more often, they say people speak of being tired of life and not having a reason to keep on living. Psychologist Julius Segal wrote this: countless individuals beset by trauma report that their basic problem is an existence without meaning. In other words, they think their lives don't matter. We're in the book of Nehemiah, going way back in time to the 5th century BC, where God is bringing faith back to a world. Things had gone terrible. In the 6th century, Babylon had utterly destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. And I want you to think about it, because there are churches everywhere around the world today, but for 100 years of human history, there was no real visible presence of the worship of God. It had all been wiped out, but about 100 years later, God, as he always does, says, I'm bringing renewal. I'm setting the world back to rights. He inspires a man named Ezra to come back to Jerusalem. He begins to rebuild sort of a portion of the temple. And then 15 years later, Nehemiah comes back, and he feels called by God to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem. And we might think, why does that matter in 2023? What can Christians today learn from people building a wall in such ancient times? But we have to remember, it wasn't just a wall. It was a physical picture of God saying, the world is in a bad place. I'm back. I'm bringing renewal. I want to bring my presence. I want to build a community of people who will worship me, to speak to the world that there is a God, there is renewal, that better days are coming. And God does that through every generation. So we can learn a lot of lessons from Nehemiah 3 about how we can do that, in particular, because just like in the 5th century BC, every person had to play their role. That wall was built, as we're about to see, by a lot of different people. And I think the same thing is true today, that everybody who attends here or is a member here or watches online, for us to be the community that God created us to be, to fulfill the mission that he wants to do in this day and age, every person here matters. I don't care whether you're 8, I mean that, or 18, or 48, or 88. For this wall to be rebuilt today, we all have to do our part. And while the church needs you, I would say you need the church. When you understand your role in building the wall, your life will never be the same. We're looking at Nehemiah 3 today. It's considered flyover country by a lot of commentators because it's literally just a list of names of people who are building a portion of the wall. And Kurt kindly assigned it to me. You look at basically this phone book. Gary, I think you would be perfectly capable of preaching through this. I want to just give you a portion, just verses 6 through 8. I'm not going to have us read the whole chapter. We'd never get through it. But this is how the whole chapter reads. Beginning with verse 6. The J gate was repaired by Joe, son of Pat, and Malcolm, son of Bob. They laid its beams and put its doors with their bolts and bars in place. Next to them, repairs were made by men from Gibeon and Mizpah, Matthew of Gibeon and Jaden of Maranoth, places under the authority of the governor of Trans-Euphrates. Uzziel, son of Harry, now I might be bugging some of you that I'm using anglicized names. Confession, I dropped out of Hebrew in seminary, right? 2 years of Greek. Hebrew is really hard, y'all. You have to go to Kurt if you want Hebrew. And I just don't even know how to pronounce it. And I just want to say, if we go, I would ask you, what would you do if you had to pronounce this name in front of all of these people? I'm going to give you a chance. On the count of 3, here's the name. I want you to call out how you would pronounce this name. 1, 2, 3. Okay, you actually did better than I thought I could do. But I'm going to stick with Harry. One of the goldsmiths repaired the next section. And Hank, one of the perfume makers, made repairs next to that. The whole chapter, that's what it's like. But what we see that is so significant in that is that the wall was built not by one person, but a team that was inspired to bring the renewal of God to the world. We're in the thick of football season. I know some of you don't even want to think about it. Some of you are kind of mourning what's happening with your team. But if you're a fan, let's just go with it. There's a great analogy of this. I have a friend named Jeff Kemp. He played quarterback in the NFL for 11 seasons here with the Seahawks. He also played for the Rams, the 49ers, and the Eagles. I think of all the stories that Jeff has told me, the one coach that he was particularly impressed with was Bill Walsh. For good reason, Bill Walsh led the 49ers to 3 Super Bowl wins. And Jeff just saw he did things differently. One of the things that was so different, when he's installing a new play, a lot of coaches would separate the linemen and the backfield and other positions, but Bill wanted them all to come together because he explained to all of them, I want you to see what they have to do and what they have to do. Everybody's got to sacrifice. Everybody's got to take the hit for this play to work. And in his book, Facing the Blitz, which is a great, if you like football and faith, I really recommend that you check this out. You'll love this book. Jeff explains how Bill Walsh introduced a play. This is an actual play from the 49ers at the time. Brown right, Fox to Z post. Brown right, Fox to Z post. It's a play action pass. And Bill explained how the way that a play action pass works is that you have to sell the run. If the defense doesn't think you're intending to run, you're not going to be successful with the pass. And so the offensive linemen have to block as if it's a run. They're going to go to the left. They might do a cut block. They know they're going to get kneed. They're going to get in a helmet, likely be on the ground, and they're going to have their hands stepped on. The running back will never touch the ball, but he has to sell it like he is. And so he's wrapping his hands around an imaginary ball. In one play, he goes over the center. And he knows he's going to try to draw a lineman to hit him in the head, to throw him to the ground because they think he has the ball, and he doesn't. The quarterback knows because this play is to go quick with a pass, nobody's going to block the defensive left end. So he has less than 2.5 seconds to get rid of the ball, and he knows as soon as he throws it, he's going to be slammed to the ground by a very heavy left defensive end. Every player is going to hurt, and every player is going to sacrifice. And Bill Walsh wanted everybody to see how essential it was for each player to do his role. Here's how Jeff describes it. Understanding the unique role and sacrifice of teammates at other positions gives every player a greater sense of purpose. It builds confidence in the value of doing his part, making his sacrifice, and making the play succeed. In football, unless every player plays his role, does his job, and sells out for his teammates, there will be no success for everyone to share. I believe Nehemiah teaches us that what's true on the football field is true in God's kingdom. It's not built on superheroes. It's built on people taking ownership where every person does his part. It's a team effort. But let's get more specific. A few things we can learn from this chapter. The first thing is that individuals will take ownership. Individuals will take ownership. Can anybody name one of the two quarterbacks of the 49ers who won a Super Bowl? Say out loud. Yes, a lot of people know. It's easy. Joe Montana, Steve Young, very famous people. Can anybody tell me the name of the starting center for the last two Super Bowls they won? Call it out loud. Raise your hand, call it out loud. I've got an autographed book from, what's that? No. 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 Isn't Kelsey with Taylor Swift? Whole different Ealer. You're thinking of a different Kelsey. All right. I'm going to leave this here for the other one. It's actually Fred Quillen. Fred Quillen was the starting quarterback the last two times they won the Super Bowl. And here's the thing. Before every play started, Fred handled the ball. There were a lot of plays where Ronnie Lott would never touch the ball. Jerry Rice would never touch the ball. No play happened on the offense without Fred Quillen getting it started. And yet he's not even known by most people except for maybe a few family members or if he happened to be visiting this Sunday. And the same thing happens in the wall with Nehemiah. A lot of people are named, but it's interesting because the chapter begins with people who aren't named, the men of Jericho. The men of Jericho built the adjoining section. We don't know their names. They're looked at communally. They got together and they got it done, and that's how God's church is built. The center who snaps the ball is not going to get a statistic if the play action pass results in a touchdown. The offensive tackle who's guarding will not get a statistic. Nobody will even know they were a part of the play. But they are as essential to the success of the play as the quarterback and the receiver doing it. And the same thing is true in God's church. Some people will be visible, some people aren't, but every person is important. So that when somebody says to me, Gary, I wish Cherry Hills would do this, or why can't Cherry Hills do that? As a pastor, I just want to say, you're Cherry Hills. Go do that. We'll pray for you. We're excited. We'll platform you as much as we can. Because this isn't just a top-down organization. We've had a couple that did that. I think of Tim and Cynthia Phillips. I've talked about them before, but their role as being a blended family has given them a passion and a zeal to help other blended families. They've gone to the conferences, they've read the book, they've lived the life. They have a small group that meets in their home, and next week, if you check out the app, they're starting a connection class, the Smart Step Family class. Go to the app, go under groups, and you'll find it. And so Cherry Hills has a great ministry to blended families that nobody is being paid to run. We don't have a staff member that has to organize it. It was somebody just recognized, we're going to be one of the unnamed men of Jericho. We think the church needs this, and we're going to make it happen. The second thing we see in the book of Nehemiah is that some do more than others. There's this man named Meremoth. He begins in verse 4 by preparing the next section. And a lot of people say, okay, I did that. It's done. I've done my part. Let's go on and do something else. But there's something about Meremoth that says, hey, I'm done. The wall isn't finished. Well, what can I do next? And so he pops back up in verse 21. Next to him, Meremoth repaired another section from the entrance of Eliashib's house to the end of it. Every church to fulfill its function needs Meremoths. We have a lot of those here at Cherry Hills. I think of one couple in particular. I think of Corey and Lori Fryer. You might have seen their testimony a number of weeks back. But they're one of those precious couples where almost every Sunday, you see them at Kids Point in one of the services so that other people can enjoy the worship service here without their kids being with them if they don't want them to be. And then I saw them here on Monday setting up for Manna, which is our ministry to help families that need some help getting some food. And then I've seen them here on Wednesday nights at date night. They're watching kids so that other couples can work on their marriage. I've seen them here on weekends for the concerts and for Jingle Jam. And there are some people who volunteer, for example, Love Extended, which we're grateful for. We had so many people volunteer for Love Extended. And they think, okay, I did that, I'm good for 6 months. But Corey and Lori are one of those couples where they say, okay, we did this on Sunday, what can we do on Monday? And is there something we can do on Wednesday? And what about on the weekend? Now, look, they're empty nesters. They're in a different station in life. But I still think it's great to commend them, as Nehemiah commends so many people, where they could spend all of this time they have on something else. And they're one of those couples like Meremoth, where they say, give us one task. As soon as that's done, give us something else. We want to see this wall get built. We want to see God bring renewal to our country and to our community. The third thing we see is that the call matters more than the qualifications. This is interesting. In verse 12, we read this: Shallum, ruler of a half district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section with the help of his daughters. Now, if you look at old commentaries as opposed to new ones, it's fascinating because the old ones think there has to be a mistake here, even though there's no textual evidence for this at all. And the reason they think there must be a mistake is that it was physical labor. Think about construction in 446 BC, putting a wall like this together. It's heavy labor, and it was dangerous. Well, we'll see next week how some people told Nehemiah, if you don't stop building the wall, we will kill you and everybody who's working with you, which is why some had to work with swords in one hand and a shovel in the other. And so earlier commentators said it just can't be his daughters. A man wouldn't have his daughters exposed to that work and that danger, but he did. It's so clear in the text. And you look at every modern translation and they agree with that. And so it's a picture, somebody says the job needs to get done. We're not gonna worry how others think we're qualified. We're gonna focus instead on the call. And maybe some of you sense that call. You think, I wanna do this. Oh, that's not for daughters, that's for sons. Well, Shallum's daughters didn't worry about that. Because if you're passionate, if you get the zeal for building God's house, you don't worry as much about your qualifications as you do about the need. When I was a much younger man in my 20s, I did what a lot of guys in their 20s do when a buddy needed something done. We just get a bunch of us together. And one guy was putting in a new hot tub. We had to take it from a truck in the street into the backyard. There's a slope in the grass. There's probably 6 or 7 of us, and it was really heavy. I'll never forget walking down the grass hill when we started to slide a little bit. And somebody said, hold on, we're gonna drop this thing. And one of my friends, Matt, he was actually a pastor of the church next to me, he dove under the hot tub and put his back underneath it to stabilize it. And I thought, I like his zeal, not so much his intelligence here. He could lose his back for the rest of his life. But you know, when you're 20, you don't think about that. You're thinking, hey, somebody's got to stabilize it. I've got it back. I'm going to get under it. I'm going to get it there. And he was okay, and he's okay today. And those are sort of like the daughters of Shallum. They just say, here's the need. We're going to offer our backs to get it done. Because the wall gets built by people who listen to what God is telling them to do, not to what critics are telling them they can't or shouldn't do. The next thing we see is that we're called to start building the wall where we live. In verse 23, we read, beyond them, Benjamin and Hassab made repairs in front of their house. And next to them, Azariah made repairs beside his house. And throughout the entire chapter, you see places like this. This was the most common place for people to build the wall, right where they lived. It makes sense. And so you might be feeling a tug of the Spirit. Yeah, maybe I should be giving myself to this work, but where do I start? I don't even know where to begin. And the question is, where do you live? What's your passion? What are you already doing? Can you turn that into an act of bringing renewal to God's world? We have a member here who's a bartender. She works during the week. And for a number of years, she had a guy, an older guy. He was in late 80s and then early 90s. He would come in the same time every day, sit in the same chair, and order the same drink. She didn't have to ask him anymore. He liked Miller Lite Draft. And she would give it to him, and she could kind of tell he was waiting all day. He'd take a sip, and he'd go, beer. That's the good stuff. He'd do that every day. Well, he also came in on the weekend. She doesn't work weekends. So he came in one weekend afternoon, took his same place, same chair, ordered the same thing, Miller Draft Light. He took a drink, then he fell over, and he died. Not making it up. Now, he's in his 90s. His family was sad, but I think one of them was tempted to say, well, at least he died doing what he loved, because he did. But the weekend bartender freaked out. I mean, what's going on? We've got a guy just dying right here. What's happening? So they called our member. She went out. She's sort of just a real stable, strong person. She could take care of the customers. She could take care of the staff and whatnot. Her intro to Cherry Hills came about because she wanted prayer for her family. And so she just came to the church and said, is there a pastor here who will pray for me? One of her pastors, Brian, went down to talk with her, and he listened to what she does. And he changed her life with a new perspective when she described what she does. And he says, you know, you're their chaplain. She said, what? You're their chaplain. Think about it. You're serving them. You're listening to them. You're cleaning up after them. He goes, you got to tell some of these people no. People in a bar often don't want to be told no. He goes, you're serving as their chaplain. And it changed the way she looked at herself. It changed the way she looked at her job, realizing that a lot of those people would never come inside these walls. But she could bring the presence of God from these walls out to where she is. And that's what we can do. What is your job? What is right in front of you? Begin there. I want to make it clear. Cherry Hills isn't the wall. God's kingdom is the wall. At Cherry Hills, we see this as a place for you to be inspired, equipped, encouraged, and join with others to do the work that God has called you to do. But all the work won't be done here on Sunday morning. It's all about going out Monday through Saturday. And we see this in Nehemiah 3. It's stunning how many different roles people played. Not everybody here has a role to do something on Sunday morning, but we can build the wall throughout the week. Look at the number of people mentioned. They use priests to build the wall, perfume makers. Now, I don't know about you, if I'm building a wall, I'm not thinking I'm recruiting people who make perfume. But he does, and it works. Political leaders, Levites, goldsmiths, merchants, they all offer their thing. So do you see yourself as a chaplain to those you serve? Are you a coach? Do you cut hair? Are you a parent? Are you a teacher? Do you have a business? Can you change your life and say, I want God to bring renewal right where I am? God, help me to look at my job, look at my life in a different way, that my life matters, that speaking up matters, that trying to get this person to see the truth, that matters. It needs to get done. To see, in the end, if you take the big view of Nehemiah 3, the one thing he makes it so clear, it's not about one hero here and one hero there. It is about putting together a team. The staff and leadership of Cherry Hills can't build the wall because we need a team. This book came out just this year. It's called Leadership is Overrated by Kyle Bucket and Chris Mefford. I don't like the title. I don't think leadership is overrated. But he's making the point, which is a great point, that the future of management in businesses, in churches, in academic institutions is to get away from this hierarchical superhero and realize how we need to build teams. Kyle is a Navy SEAL. And he talked about when they would go through their trainings, they had an exercise called Kill the Leader. And they would metaphorically, in the middle of training, take the leader out to say, what is the number 2 man gonna do? And then they might kill the number 2 man. What is number 3 gonna do? Because I realize if you're out on a SEAL expedition, you don't know. They might get killed. And if taking one leader out destroys the operation, you're very vulnerable. And so they realize you have to put together a team, that leaders matter, but if success depends on a single person, you're gonna have a low level of success. Here's how he explains it. Small but dedicated teams of empowered individuals can and do outperform large organizations driven by top-down leadership. What makes organizations great, truly great, and not temporarily successful is not a single leader, but a culture of self-leadership. When done right, a self-led team will always be superior to the antiquated methods of a hierarchical organization. Look, in my years, I've seen this in the church. There's some hotshot celebrity that comes up, so successful for 5 or 10 years. Everybody is gathering around it. Their identity is in this leader. And all it takes is, it's a scandal, it's a health crisis, somebody dies. And I've literally seen huge churches disappear because it wasn't built on a team of people passionate about seeing renewal come to the world. It was built on one man's or one woman's vision. That's not what we want to do here. Kyle goes on to say this: history maximizes the importance of heroes, but minimizes the significance of teams. It's a great historical story to back that up. In the late 19th century, a ship named Belgica, it was a whaling ship, sailed from Antwerp to go do research in the Antarctic. Now that was sort of a celebrated, risky, kind of romantic thing to do. The ship was led by an admiral named de Gerlach, and he brought together all of these scientists and people to do the research, but they really weren't qualified to face the rigors and the harsh climate of the Antarctic. They really didn't know what they were doing, and so the whaling ship literally got caught in the ice in March of that year. There's ice all around them. They couldn't get out. And then they tried for 2 months. They were unsuccessful. And so when the sun set in May, if you know your geography, it doesn't rise for a number of months. So they are trapped in the ice, terrible cold, perpetual darkness, without the resources they needed. It was awful, and men started to get sick. Kyle writes, the crew was filled with despair, and death loomed over the darkened horizon of each day. Some men literally began to go insane, and then other men started to die one by one. But with an amazing story of perseverance and determination to survive, after 13 months of being trapped in ice, the Belgica made its way into Antwerp. De Gerlach was hailed as this hero. He was the celebrity of the day. He overcame the odds, and you can imagine the gratitude of family members and friends that thought their loved ones were dead, and he brought them back, and he became the man of the hour in Antwerp. But it was all a lie, because de Gerlach was sick for almost the entire expedition. He was so sick, he was confined to a deathbed, and he wrote out his will. And in fact, the second in command, the captain, also grew sick. He also was in bed almost the whole time, and he also wrote out his will, never expecting to recover. The only reason the Belgica got back to Antwerp is that 2 mid-level people, the first mate named Amundsen and the ship's surgeon named Cook, stepped up and said, if we're gonna get out of here, things have to change. As a surgeon, Cook knew that one of the things that was killing the men was scurvy. And so he began insisting that they go out and hunt seal and penguins, and he had them eat it raw, because then it has more content of vitamin C, which he knew they needed to survive. De Gerlach had forbid them when he was healthy to do that. He said, it's disgusting, you know, we're refined gentlemen, we don't do that. But he was too sick to complain, and so Cook had him do that, and the men started to recover. And then he organized fires on the ice at night to just give them some warmth and diversion. And he had them play card games with imaginary money. Anything to keep their mind off their dire situation. The men started to get stronger, and de Gerlach actually started to eat some of that meat, that raw meat, and he began to get stronger. And with renewed health, they gave it another effort. They used saws, they used explosives, and finally managed to get their way out of the ice and back to Antwerp. And while de Gerlach had gotten well enough to lead the ship into harbor, he was carried there by his team. It wasn't the story of a great leader, it was the story of an amazing team. So I don't think leadership is overrated. Trust me, I've been in a lot of organizations. I think leadership really matters. But for long-term success, and Nehemiah tells us in God's kingdom, the team matters even more. People who step up, people I think like Morgan and Cole Walton, a wonderful family in our church with 4 kids. I mean, isn't that a great family? And you think with so much going on in their life with young kids, Morgan is behind so much of what happens here that people never see. She's a master of lobby decor. Have any of you taken pictures at the photo booths that we have at Christmas or Easter? You know how we've had? Then you have a picture of what Morgan's done in your camera. She's here for MOPS, mothers of preschoolers. She comes in on Wednesday nights to help out with date nights to make sure it looks great, which means Cole has to get all 4 kids here on his own on Wednesday night because Morgan has to come earlier to make it happen. And you might think they've got such a great family, they've got such a busy life. Why would she find time to build this church? And the answer is because she loves Jesus. And if you love Jesus, you love his church. It's a powerful story in the life of Jesus. He didn't have to build the temple. It was already built by the time he came. But remember, he had to cleanse it. He was so offended about how it was being turned into a marketplace that Jesus went in and he overturned the money changers' tables and whatnot. And as the disciples watched him, they remembered this passage from the Old Testament that zeal for your house consumes me. Zeal for your house consumes me. What consumes you? The eternal work of God's church on this planet? Or are you more consumed with building your own Instagram house, or finding your romantic partner, or keeping your marriage alive, saving that number for retirement? Many people are consumed with what's happening with their football team or who is going to be elected president next. I'll be honest, I'm still restoring a house. I work to keep my marriage alive and intimate. We're saving for retirement, and I care who wins on Saturday, and I certainly care who the next president is. But what consumes me? What consumes you? At the end of my life, when I'm gone, when my friends and family members look back, what do they say? What put an extra enthusiasm in his voice? Where did he spend his money? Where did he spend his, what was he most passionate about? I want it to be God's house. And I believe you want it to be that as well. Because everything else that we might give our time to, it always disappoints, doesn't it? Do you realize that 99% of college football fans will be disappointed because their team isn't going to be there in the end, in January? We save money for retirement, and then something happens in the economy, and 40% of it is gone. I don't know who's going to be elected president next year, but I know this: 49% of the country is going to be really upset about it. All of these things that consume us, and we give our time, and they disappoint us again and again. And Jesus offers us something eternal that's fulfilling, and he dares to say, you have a role to play. That this wall is being built, and look at this wall. If this stone weren't there, if it was your job to put the stone, if this stone isn't there, it's really exposed, or this whole section isn't done because people are off fighting other battles that don't really matter? Will we let zeal for God's house begin to consume us? A church that will be filled with the unnamed men of Jericho. You see a need and you're gonna make it happen, even if we're not in charge of it. The men of Merimoth who get one thing done and say, all right, what's next? We've got a lot to do. God is doing a new work here. The daughters of Shalom, they might think I'm not qualified or I'm not supposed to do that. I think God has called me to do that. I'm gonna do that. And you'll pull yourself together. If you've been coming here very long, you've heard us say this phrase, that there's a place here for you. It's true. Nehemiah adds something else. There's a place here for you that no one else can fill. If you're a young teen, if you're 20s, 40s, 80s, I believe that's true. And Nehemiah 3 is God's wake-up call for us to let something else concern us. Now, this is a great day to take this vision on because we've got starting point. If you want to know, well, how do I get plugged into this particular church? Right after the service today, you'll go through these doors and go left, ask somebody, they'll point you to room 107. Starting point is a great way to hear what we do, what we're about, and how you can plug in. Even if you're not signed up, I told Bronson last week, let's order extra. I'm gonna be mentioning it in the sermon. It's just an exciting call, y'all, that Jesus is building his church and says, you can play a role in the most important thing going on. And so what we wanna do is sort of worship this into our hearts and souls. Instead of just going, if this isn't your passion, will you sing this song and say to God's Spirit, Lord, make this my prayer, make this my song. I've been so focused on me and small concerns. Lord, I realize something much bigger is going on. Lord, use me to build your church.